The basic units of visual arts are the formal elements: line, shape, light, value, color, texture, space, time, and motion. The visual elements are the elements from which a painting is constructed and are the elements that we perceive and respond to when we look at a work's form. The visual elements are also used in art for expression and to communicate feelings. They are the vocabulary that helps us describe art. Line can define shape. In art, a line has both length and width. They also have direction: horizontal, vertical, diagonal, curved, meandering, zigzagged, or straight. Line serves as a basic building block around which an art form is constructed, and by itself has the capacity to evoke thought and emotion. The variety of line would seem to be infinite. Line may also be perceived as expressive, delicate, tentative, elegant, assertive, forceful, or even brutal. Line is the first of the traditional 7 elements of design that actualize and express an artist's vision. Sol LeWitt's line from 4 corners to points on a grid has lines whose measures are carefully devised. They are so precise and mathematical that he was acutely conscious of their measure. They are so precise that the artist knew the measurement of each and every line. The lines are assertive but cold. The emotional human element is missing, and the work seems to express the human capacity to detach the intellect from emotional response. LeWitt does not execute his drawings himself. Rather, he creates the instructions for making the drawing and entrusts their execution to others. The subject of the drawing is the set of instructions for its creation, and LeWitt insists that they be posted nearby. The precise instructions seem dry and uncompromising, as though the artist were reining in creativity rather than unleashing it. Yet the finished drawings, while restrained, are often elegant. The idea or concept is the governing principle in LeWitt's work. In comparison, Jackson Pollock's No. 14 Gray expresses forceful and gestural lines that are loose and fluid, that seems to exude passion. His work appears spontaneous. His lines weave and overlap and swell. There is a sense of movement that LeWitt's work suggests the presence of a plan. Pollock suggests the presence of a human being weaving elegantly through the complexities of thought and life. Line in art is the most basic element and is a tool for infinite variety. We also have contour lines, actual lines, implied lines, and psychological lines. Strictly speaking, an outline defines a 2-dimensional shape, whereas contour lines mark the edges of a 3-dimensional object. The points in an actual line are connected and continuous. The lines in LeWitt and Pollock's work are actual lines. Implied lines are completed by the viewer and can be used as an organizational device of a composition. The human eye can imagine lines in places where there may not be any lines. An implied line can be a discontinuous line that the viewer reads as a solid, unbroken line, or can be suggested by a series of points or dots, as you can see in the B and C diagrams. These implied lines appear in the figures as a continuous line because the mind's eye connects the dots. Our eye observes the general direction in which the undulations of the lines in diagram C go. We see these implicit lines because our mind prefers to see a unified whole before it experiences the individual parts. This principle was developed as part of Gestalt psychology in the early 20th century. The German word Gestalt means forms, pattern, or shape. Gestalt psychologists observe that people are much more likely to see complete and unified patterns such as single lines rather than the fragments and parts. We can also see implied lines in the movements and gestures of figures in a composition. Psychological lines are similar to implied lines, only psychological lines are created with gestures or glances. For example, in the Madonna of the Rocks, Leonardo da Vinci arranged the four figures in his paintings so that on the surface they are in the shape of a triangle. Mary appears to encourage the infant John the Baptist to come forward by placing an arm around him. The slope of her arm and his back, as well as the eye line of her glance, creates a diagonal on the left. The diagonal on the right runs down the back of the angel Uriel. John the Baptist stares at the Christ child, and the angel's pointing finger generates another implied line across the painting. Mary holds an outstretched hand towards and above her child's head, part of a vertical line that runs up the Christ child's arm and through the angel's hand. The overall pyramidal shape is not only implied by position and physical gestures of the participants, but also by the direction of the glances between the figures. If a figure in a painting points to an object, or if one figure gazes directly towards another, as in the Madonna of the Rocks, we automatically follow the line of sight, and this creates a psychological line which forms a mental or perceptual connection. Psychological lines are also called compositional lines and act like an implied line. The functions of line. Another function of line is to outline the shape. When you make or observe an outline, you are describing or suggesting the edge of a form or a shape. Line defines a shape or form as separate from its surrounding space. It gives birth to shape or form. Outlines are the edge of a 2D object, whereas contours are the outer edge of a 3D object, a solid object. Shapes and masses have some of the same characteristics as line. Like line, they have direction and make pathways for the eye. Line can also create depth and texture. Sharecropper by Elizabeth Cadaletti is a wonderful example of how various lines can create depth and texture. Cadaletti cut a series of short, energetic lines into linoleum to reveal the features of a gaunt but yet proud and dignified woman. The closer the lines are together, the more shadowing they create. And these darker areas contrasted with lighter areas produce the illusion of depth, along with a richly textured surface, which also helps create the illusion of depth. Texture is an important element in the visual arts, and artists have a variety of techniques they use to create texture and depth. Let's discuss some ways to create texture and depth. Artists may use stippling, hatching, cross-hatching, and contour hatching as ways not only to create texture, but also depth. Figure A shows the method of stippling, in which shading is represented by a pattern of dots. The closer the dots, the darker the area appears. The shading gives the viewer the illusion of 3D. Hatching, as seen in Figure B, is a series of closely spaced parallel lines. This technique produces the same effect as stippling. Cross-hatching, as seen in Figure C, is a technique in which two series of parallel lines crisscross on top of one another. Contour hatching is used to produce a change in direction, as seen in Figure D. Shading is produced when the lines are drawn closer together. To further illustrate these techniques, let's look at the sketches of a leg. The cross contour produces a clearly defined leg but lacks muscular detail. The hatching of line, and particularly the crisscrossing of lines in the third sketch, creates stronger contrasts of darks and lights, and so therefore produces the stronger illusion of a muscular leg. In this example, the cross-hatching clearly produces the illusion of a three-dimensional limb. Lines also suggest movement. If lines have movement, they also have direction. They can go up and down, move diagonally, or continuously change direction. These directions have significance because the mind's eye, moving along a line, projects emotional states onto the line's location. Most of us have instinctive reactions to the direction of line, which are related to our experience of gravity. Flat, horizontal lines seem placid, like the horizon line, or a body in repose. Vertical lines, like those of an upright body or a skyscraper jutting up from the ground, may have an assertive quality. They defy gravity in their upward thrust. In general, horizontal lines feel calm and serene, while vertical can express a feeling of strength and resolution. But the most dramatic lines are the diagonals, which almost always imply action. Diagonal lines seem more energetic and exciting because they move in two directions at once, up or down and across. Curved lines seem to flow like water or like a musical melody and visually express a feeling of constant change or gracefulness. Think of a runner hurtling down the track or a skier down the slope. The body leans forward so that only the forward motion keeps it from toppling over. Diagonal lines in art have the same effect. We sense motion because the lines seem unstable. We half expect them to topple over. However, in general, horizontal lines suggest stability. Vertical lines defy gravity and suggest assertiveness, and diagonal lines, as we said, imply movement and directionality. African-American artist Jacob Lawrence placed figures on the diagonal in his painting Harriet Tubman Series No. 4. This is one in a series of 31 images that documents the struggle and heroic achievements of Harriet Tubman, the 19th century abolitionist. Lawrence, with a remarkable simplicity and vivid colors, placed the flat forms of the children on a diagonal, and so produced a powerful sense of movement and directionality. While the horizon line, which is the name given to the imaginary line where the sky meets the ground, provides a somewhat stable world within which the children with outstretched limbs perform acrobatic leaps.